What's up, guys? It's Jesse here from My Naps, and today we're going to be talking about Beneil Dariush. In my opinion, he's one of the most underrated fighters in the UFC, most specifically his jiu-jitsu. And I saw this a lot leading up into the Tony fight, and then again now that people are kind of discussing him versus Oliveira. And one thing I've noticed is that everyone seems to really, really underrate his ground game. I think part of that is that Beneil's his entire career, he's kind of just flown under the radar. He's kind of just been quietly racking up those wins. He's had a couple of performances in the night, one fight of the night with Ferreira. But yeah, for some reason, he just always kind of seems to fly under the radar of a lot of people, and they don't really view him as one of those top guys at the weight class. I think that the win that he got this weekend over Tony Ferguson kind of proves that he's one of those top guys and that he's a real threat. If you look at his career, he did have a little bit of a losing streak there. He had the KO flying knee loss to Barbosa, then he had a majority draw with Dunham, and then the Hernandez punch knockout. But since then, he's on a 6-fight win streak with those 3 performances of the night and that one fight of the night with Ferreira, and then just most recently the absolute one-sided beatdown of Tony Ferguson, former interim champion, former number 2 ranked guy in the division, just behind the champion, and the owner of one of the most impressive win streaks in UFC history, especially in the lightweight division, with it being such a stacked division. But I think there was a couple things going into that fight. One was that everyone kind of talked about how if it got to the ground, Tony would be this huge threat. He's got to watch out for the elbows and this, that, and the other thing, and how good Tony's jiu-jitsu was. But nobody was really talking about Beneil's jiu-jitsu in the lead up to the fight, which I found kind of weird because he was a 3-time world jiu-jitsu champion, 4-time silver medalist, and 2 times bronze medalist. So, the guys competed at the highest levels of jiu-jitsu and, come out on top, 3 golds, 4 silvers, 2 bronze. It's insanely impressive by any standards. So, the guy is one of the best pure jiu-jitsu guys in the division. And he's talked about how since turning to MMA, the number one thing he's focused on is wrestling. And that he hasn't really worried too much about the striking. Obviously, he also has a black belt in Muay Thai under Rafael Cadero, who's an amazing coach. But he, in his own words, he said that he wrestles now more than he does anything. So you have a guy who's a former Jiu-Jitsu world champion who now focuses his game mainly on wrestling. And for some reason, people thought Tony Ferguson was going to out-grapple him. I thought that was kind of weird. And now you see the same thing with Oliveira. With Tony, I think a lot of the hype was because he was Eddie Bravo's guy, and Eddie Bravo has a really effective system of jiu-jitsu, most specifically designed for MMA. And he's obviously an amazing coach and has developed a lot of high-level fighters, especially, Tony's probably the highest-level pure MMA fighter that he's developed, but a lot of high-level guys in pure jiu-jitsu as well. And basically, to a large degree, invented the entire sub-sport of combat jiu-jitsu. So obviously with him coming from such a good jiu-jitsu gym, Tony Ferguson, people did, view him as one of these top guys. But I think when you really look at it and you see that that Dariush, is this former world champion, it makes a lot of sense that he was able to work his way through Tony Ferguson. And I think we see that thing a lot with Charles Oliveira as well. People tend to think that Oliveira is going to walk through through Dariush for some reason, and especially on the ground. And I've seen a lot of people talk about how if it gets to the ground, it'll be a problem for Dariush because Charles is so good with his jiu-jitsu. And to some degree, I think that is true. Like, he is an amazing jiu-jitsu player. He's a 3rd-degree black belt. He has the record for the most jiu-jitsu or most submissions, in the UFC. And again, he does come from a very good jiu-jitsu school. And, coming out of Brazil, which is the mecca of jiu-jitsu, a lot of people obviously very high on his jiu-jitsu. But in terms of pure jiu-jitsu, he's never competed at near the level that Dariush did. He has been training forever. His original martial art was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He started at the age of 12, and he was competing by the time he was he was competing in 2013, or 2003 in Jiu-Jitsu, which would mean he was born in 89, so he'd be around 14, 15 years old at that time. So he has been, doing Jiu-Jitsu and competing at a young age, but he never achieved the level of success that Dariush did in pure jiu-jitsu. Now, when it comes to MMA, he's very effective, and there's a variety of reasons for that. One is that he was so long, especially when he was fighting at featherweight. Now he's moved up to lightweight. He doesn't have quite the reach advantage he did on guys at featherweight, but he still has a huge reach advantage on most of these guys because he is such a long, skinny guy. But he was really effective at using his jiu-jitsu off of his back because he was so long that he could keep guys off of him. So even though guys would knock him down a lot of the time, he would knock him down or take him down. He would be able to submit them because he was just so long and they couldn't really do damage to him. So part of it, I think, is his body type. His body type is a lot better for jiu-jitsu and MMA than somebody like Dariush, who's a little more stocky. Dariush, I think, they're about the same height, actually, but Dariush has quite a bit of a reach disadvantage. Oliveira is kind of the lankier, bonier guy, so a lot of his weight is in his bones, even though they're the same height. But yeah, I think just all around, I think people just really, really underestimate Dariush's grappling. I think, the accolades speak for themselves, right? Like, nobody expects anyone to go out there and out-grapple Maia, right? But Dariush, who has not quite as an impressive record, I think Maia is like an 8-time world champion and multiple world titles at black belt level, whereas Dariush's highest world title was at brown belt. Once he became a black belt, he switched over to MMA. But just all around, I think it's kind of weird that people just underrate Dariush so much. And so I think a part of it is just because he's so quiet. He doesn't really start shit, and unfortunately, especially with a lot of the more mainstream fans, that is probably the most important thing. Just how you're viewed in terms of success is largely viewed on your mouth, right? Like, if you ask the average super casual fan, they'd probably say that Nate Diaz is like one of the top MMA fighters, right? But I don't think currently he's ranked in the top 15 in any weight class he competes at. And he's never really, he had one title shot at 155 pounds, but he's never really been a top tier guy. He was always a really, really good guy and a really tough fight and a fan favorite, but never elite. Nick was more of the elite fighter. But because Nate's become so famous because of that Conor McGregor win, if you ask like a lot of people that don't really watch the sport but are kind of familiar with the sport, they'd probably consider him one of the greatest ever. And Conor, they'd probably consider one of the greatest ever too, where, he's got, if you look at his in featherweight, he's arguably the worst featherweight champion ever. And I don't mean that in terms of like skill or as an insult. It's just that every other person that's held that belt has defended it multiple times, and Conor's the only one not to do it. He does have 2 title wins if you count the interim title, which would tie him with Volkanovski, but he, never defended the belt. And then when you look at lightweight, it's the same thing. There's only a handful of guys that haven't defended it. Most of the interim champions that we had for the last 2 or 3 years, Gaethje, Ferguson, although Ferguson arguably defended his because they just kind of stripped him and then he won 3 more fights, so he kind of got shafted. They should have just let him keep the title, at least the interim title, and defend it. So that was kind of bullshit. But Gaethje wasn't able to unify or defend it. Khabib was really the only one to do it recently, but like Alvarez hasn't. But yeah, Conor's one of those guys that never defended that belt either, so you'd kind of have to put him on that bottom tier of the lightweight champions. But again, he's so popular that most people would consider him one of the greatest ever. And yeah, so I think Dariush has a big problem with that, just that he's not really super famous, or outspoken, and that kind of hurts him. And yeah, so since we were talking about Conor McGregor, we'll kind of